Okay, we got a live crowd. Okay. Well, if you guys have never met me before, if you don't know me, my name is Drew. I'm the associate high school pastor here, and as you've heard, today is Mission Trip Sunday, which is something that we love because here at HSM, the mission of Christ is something that we value a lot. In fact, I would go so far as to say we value the mission of Christ above anything else. And we are so blessed that a couple times a year we can take trips to go to other parts of the world to do that. And you heard a little bit about that. Again, I would encourage you to grab more information at our next step counter after tonight if you are interested in learning some more. But we want to talk tonight a little bit about missions and about the glory of God going on around the globe. And tonight, rather than me just getting up here and telling you some stuff, we want to do something a little different. And so I've invited somebody to join me up here tonight who is probably one of the more experienced people that I know when it comes to missions, and is definitely the most well-traveled person I know. Just recently got back in the country. Would you guys give it up for Mr. JD Lakse? Oh, it's so weird. I don't think they like you.
Thank you, Row 6. You guys are bad. You're lovely people.
Here's kind of what tonight is going to look like, how we want to do it. A little bit ago, just before the band came up to lead us in worship, Ben read a scripture to us, Psalm 96. We're going to revisit that now, and kind of what we're going to do during the rest of our time tonight is to just kind of walk through Psalm 96 a little bit at a time, and then what we're going to do is after each little section, we're just going to pause and I'm going to ask you a question that kind of ties into that part of Psalm 96 to see if you've experienced in your life that it's true. And what you've experienced of that. And so these are some questions that are fresh to JD as of today. And so with that, let's just jump right. Are you ready? Should we jump?
Ready.
Should we jump into it? Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Most of them are ready.
So they're like ready-ish. They'll get there. They'll be ready when it comes time. Okay, so Psalm 96. It starts out, the writer says, "Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all of the earth." And so kind of just as like a baseline opening question, what have you, JD, experienced of the glory of Jesus in your travels around the world? You've been to more places than I could name. But what have you experienced of the glory of Jesus around the world?
It's a big world. I think I mentioned that this morning. I said Walt Disney's a liar. It's not a small world after all. It's a giant, giant world. But with that, kind of experiencing the glory of who Jesus is in that process, the more I've traveled, the more I've seen who God is and how God works. And the presence of God in places that seem so dark and we kind of hear about here, but don't always get to experience. So experiencing firsthand, communist China. I went to Russia and was still communist in places like that, Uganda, Brazil, Ukraine, and about 45 other countries to experience God in other languages, other people groups, other cultures, and the glory of who He is. You get to see the commonality of how He's wired us and how much He loves us. To worship in another language and just to listen because the words are totally different, the languages are totally different, but God is the same, and that's been an amazing thing to experience. So.
That's awesome. All right, so Psalm 96, it continues, and it says, "Sing to the Lord, praise His name, proclaim His salvation day after day, declare His glory among the nations, His marvelous deeds among all people." So JD, you've been all over the world. What's it been like to go kind of on behalf of Jesus, like to share the good news of Jesus around the world, and kind of maybe how different groups of people received that differently?
Great question. In being in different parts of the world, different cultures, different people groups, some indigenous, very, very like tribal, if you will, in parts of the Amazon, Brazil, and parts of China where you still can't really talk about Jesus openly. And just so many different ways Jesus is shared. But ultimately, His name is proclaimed in a variety of ways, through missions organizations, through trips, through Calvary that we've done and will continue to do because God's called us to do it. He's commanded us to do it. So being a part of that and getting to see how people receive Jesus is overwhelming. And sometimes it's one person on the street when you're preaching in Moscow who's having a hard day, and you can just tell, and God calls you just to talk with them. Or it's a person on the flight to South America, and you can just tell there's something about what's going on in their story. You can tell they're having a hard day, and if God gives you that ability, we talk about wisdom and insight and clarity. I think we pray for those things, and ultimately, if you continue to pray for those things, God gives you that ability. I'm sure you guys see that at school too, when you see someone who's hurting or lonely or broken. The opportunity is every day. So.
That's awesome. Kind of a follow-up. I noticed you say a couple of examples, like person on a plane, person in Moscow. It seems like you were mentioning like, oh, they're going through a hard thing, or they're going through a tough day. Like, has that been your experience that God really meets people in those moments? Like when you kind of meet people in their trouble and distress. Like, what's that been like for you to go around the world and see kind of people in trouble?
Yeah. It's overwhelming but encouraging at the same time, because God's greater than we are. We don't save, Jesus saves. And I think in that moment to see and to understand that we each have hurts, and if I was to go through a list of questions like who here's had a bad week, a bad day, a broken home, divorce, disease, death, everyone here would stand up. And the same thing holds true when you travel, when you go to these places around the world and you can see it. And so to see God show up in that moment is overwhelming, because there's the freedom that comes in that moment when you get to share with somebody the good news. Even this past couple of weeks, an opportunity when we were having dinner, it was a group of 7 of us, kind of like my posse on this trail. But literally, day 1, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anyone. And it was the craziest thing to be in a place. I'm 6,000 miles from home. I don't know anybody. It's still scary. Even now, I was like, I don't know anyone here, and no one speaks English. Great, this is gonna be fun. Or divertido, as they say in Spain. But anyways, so begin this conversation on the second day, and there's like 7 of us now, all from different countries. And someone said, well, why are you on this pilgrimage? Why are you on this 500-mile hike? And I was like, a lot of reasons. One, it's kind of a time for me to reflect about who God is and what he's done in my life. And I said, part of it was played into my family story with my mom and having cancer and going to be with the Lord a couple years ago. And in that moment, this guy across from me just started crying. 73-year-old guy started weeping. He said, I lost my wife to cancer. And this gentleman to my left from Canada, a tattoo artist, kind of a tough dude, he just starts crying and says, I lost my sister this January to cancer. So God opens up conversations amidst our brokenness and amidst our stories. And we all have stories, and that's what's the powerful tool in that, but God can restore in that. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Psalm 96 continues, and the author says, for great is the Lord, and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. And so my next question is kind of like a 3-parter question, and you kind of alluded to it just now, but you just got back from something called the Camino de Santiago. My first question is going to be kind of for someone who doesn't know what that is, like, what is that? Why do people do it? Like, what are we talking about there? And then kind of what was it like having interactions with people who, A, don't know God, who are on that same journey as you, and then B, additionally, kind of maybe people who have decided what they think about God and they don't like him, or they're not happy about who God is. And so, yeah, kind of what is the Camino de Santiago?
The Camino de Santiago, it's an ancient like trading route that like missionaries, but they believe like James used to like preach the gospel in that time throughout northern Spain and southwestern France, and other missionaries would use it for many, many years to come to proclaim the gospel. So it's kind of like a Christian pilgrimage, if you will, and people do it every year. And people of faith, people who don't know the Lord, kind of as a time to reflect and kind of seek wisdom or clarity in their own life, to see if there is a God. And people, again, who are of faith interact and spend time in prayer. And it's an amazing place to be, because it's you and the Lord. And that's one of the most incredible things. If you ever had quiet time where you feel totally removed from the distractions of life at home, it's one of those places where it's concentrated for day after day after day, up to some people take about 40 days to do this entire trek. And so it's pretty amazing. And that was sorry, the first part was the community.
Part 1. Hey, yeah, here, so don't worry. I got more questions.
Okay.
So the next part of the question was kind of, I know that had been a trip that you've been looking forward to doing for a long time, that you've been planning for. It's special you got to go. But while you were on the trail, doing this like incredibly grueling thing, what was it like to meet and interact with people who don't know what they make of God? Like, what were those interactions like?
It shouldn't have been a surprise to me. The interactions were, people would want to ask questions about why I believed what I believed. And because in that part of the world, God is very much something that their grandparents, great-grandparents would go to church kind of out of a tradition. And so for them to say, well, so you work with high school students? Like, what does that mean? Well, we do bonfires and summer camp and winter camp and mission trips, and we serve in Ukraine and Uganda. Like, that's crazy. And I think that they see God as a living entity through those conversations. It's not something out of tradition, but out of command and out of a life, hopefully, that reflects that. And so in those conversations, again, people in this group, I had about 7 of us in this posse. It was Canada, Australia, Hungary, Germany, Mexico, and Scotland. It was a really cool group, and the conversations we had were all, I mean, invariably people talk about their work life, but to talk about Jesus and talk about faith and why I was there was really enlightening. And people want to know more, much like your own life. If you live that life and you say, I surrender everything, people want to know why. Why didn't you go to the party Friday night? Why didn't you get blackout drunk? Why didn't you do those things? Those same things apply in life after high school. So what you do now matters in that way as much as it is for me going on a trail 6,000 miles from here. People want to know why. Why do you do those things? Why does God matter?
Totally, and I think that's been my experience, and it sounds like your experience. And most of the time, people are just like really curious more than anything. Like, okay, what is that? What do you believe? Why do you believe that? Have you, either on the Camino or just in your life, what's it been like when you've encountered people who are just want nothing to do with God? Like they know what they think about God and they don't want anything to do with Him. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah. There are people who say, I grew up again in that tradition, and I really want nothing to do with it. It's something that my parents did, my grandparents did. I have my life under control, and I think we do the same thing here. Again, there's things that are universal in travel that kind of come to light, and I think you've met those people maybe in your own home. Maybe you're the only Christian in your house, the only Christian at the dinner table at Thanksgiving, the only person who chooses to pray in a group of friends, and that's hard. So a lot of people like that I encountered who just say, I'm kind of done with God. But it's cool to be able to pray for dinner and pray for the day and have those moments to kind of interact and kind of share that moment of faith with people.
So in verse 6, it continues on, and it says, "Splendor and majesty are before Him, strength and glory are in His sanctuary." So for you, kind of having been all over the world and been a part of so many missions projects, whether just as a team member or as a group leader, what are some ways that you've kind of seen the glory of God on display in the mission field?
Wow, that's a narrow question. It's actually huge, sorry. I would say to see the glory of God on mission trips, like it's inevitable that you're going to experience God's glory because you're doing something He's called you to do. And the experience I shared this morning was really powerful. We were on a mission trip with the high school group back in 2007 in the Amazon in northern Brazil, and it was like a medical mission. And so part of like a doctor and dentist team. I'm not a doctor. Don't ever trust me with like a scalpel or anything like that. Yeah, you don't want that. No. But we were there to kind of support this medical team, and we were basically going along these villages in the Amazon, and showed up at one where this woman had given birth 5 days before, no medical care, no painkillers, nothing, and in a tremendous amount of pain herself, but also the baby had a fever, and really there's no way for them to treat a child where they were. The baby would have died, and the mother explained to the translator, she said, "My husband's been praying for the past 3 days that someone would come." And we're just standing there in awe of what God was doing in order to save this child's life. I mean, really a group of 50 people in a large boat coming down the Amazon River where they would come every 2 or 3 months and this baby would not have survived. But to see God working that way where it's like God answers prayers that we don't even pray for, but He responds and uses us in any way that He can.
That's awesome. And then for maybe a high school student who's in the room, they've never been on a mission trip before, what would you say they can expect to experience God in the mission field? Like, what should they expect if they're going to jump in for the first time this year?
If you've not been on a missions trip, but you're thinking about it, and that would be something that God's calling you to do, and I believe we're all commanded to do that, what to expect? Expect to be rocked by that experience. And I say that in a way where to be in a part of the world where you may not speak the language. I don't speak Lugandan like they do in Uganda. I don't speak Ukrainian or Russian like they do actually a little bit, but not enough to get by. Enough to get in trouble probably, and yeah, at the border crossing, but no. But honestly, to expect God to move in ways where for you to reach out to a child in like a gypsy camp, or to be in Uganda at God Care School, in a school where so many kids are without parents, have never known a parent because their parents have died from disease or drugs or all kinds of stuff, and to be the one who loves them for the first time and cares about them. We don't know what that's like often. We have siblings, we have parents, we have aunts and uncles, extended families. We've been cared for, we've been loved, we've been well taken care of. I would assume most of us have a bed to go home to tonight. And so when you've lived without, and you're 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years old, and that's all you've known, for someone to actually pay attention to you and love you is expressing who God is, and you don't need to know the language for that. You simply need to be there. You need to show up, and that's what God calls us to do. Because to sit and say, someone else will do it, passes on the responsibility of what we've been commanded to do. So if you don't, there's kids who will miss out, obviously. And it's more than just the experience of going somewhere. The thing that really spoke to me this year, I think, particularly going to Ukraine, and having gone to Uganda in the past, there is something very like, oh my gosh, exotic. We're going to another part of the world. We're going to another continent. We're going to see a people group in Eastern Europe or Uganda or Dominican. And it's always the place. It starts off with, this is where we're going. And invariably, when we come back on the plane, it's, I met so-and-so. I talked to this student. I got to meet the teacher at God Care School. I got to talk to the pastor who was in a Soviet prison for 10 years and lived under incredible duress during that time. Like, you get to know the faces. It becomes less about the location, more about what God's doing in you. And that experience and giving you the confidence. When you come back here, there's suddenly those walls go down of like, I don't know how to share my faith. We just did with 200 people in a foreign country. You can do it here. It's up to us.
Okay, so verse 7, it continues. He says, ascribe to the Lord, all you families of nations. Ascribe to the Lord the glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. So for you, JD, you've been traveling most of your life. What's something that you've learned about God's glory through travel that you wouldn't have otherwise known if you had just stayed here?
I think how different the world is, but also how much God's wired us to love him no matter where we live, whatever language we speak. And I think I shared about that this morning a little bit, to worship in another language, to be part of a community. For those of you who went to Ukraine this year, you heard like them worshiping in the Roma language, but you knew the songs, it was familiar. And seeing that universality of who God is, it becomes more and more true about God's promise that he loves each and every one of us, and he's wired each and every one of us to love and to worship him. So it doesn't matter where you go, there's something familiar, and there's people around this world who know the Lord, but are also working tirelessly to bring souls to the kingdom through what they're doing and where they live. And so to see what God's doing in the field, in the jungle of Costa Rica, remember that trip from 7 or 8 years ago, 9 years ago now, or being in Brazil, or being in Ukraine or Uganda, to just go for that week, you guys, you will learn more knowledge, but also experience more of who God is in that time, than simply reading about it in a journal or something like that. To actually be there and to experience it, to experience God's glory in that way, and to experience the miracles of what he can do in and through you guys, it's overwhelming. Yeah.
So verse 9, he continues and says, worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. And so kind of in that verse is the phrase, say among the nations, which kind of necessitates you to go to the nations. So what would you say to someone in the room who missions sounds nice, but not for them? Or maybe that like, oh, that sounds scary. Like, what would you say to that person?
I would say missions for anyone and everyone is your next step. I mean, small groups, if you're not in one, obviously that's probably your next step, or baptism, those things. But missions is an integral part of your faith for high school and beyond. And this isn't just something I pray that you do in this time of your life, but it's necessary for you to be able to see and to understand how God works around the world. And I think it enables you to work more effectively, understand who God is, again, not just here, but around the world. So I would encourage you to go. If you've not been or been thinking about it, or kind of like nervous about it, talk to one of us. Talk to Drew or Brian or myself or Danny, any one of the leaders who's been, or one of your friends who's been. It will change you. And you may very well go because it's like, oh, I really want to go to this place. And you'll come back and go, I can't believe how God used me in that place. And it becomes about that relationship with you and God, and strengthens that tie between you and the Lord.
So we continue, and it says, let the heavens rejoice, let the earth be glad, let the sea resound and all that's in it. Let the fields be jubilant and everything in them. Let all the trees of the forest sing for joy. Let all creation rejoice before the Lord, for he comes. This chunk kind of talks a lot about the beauty of creation, and I know that beyond you being just incredibly well-traveled, you also are such a kind of student of the beauty of God's creation. Like, I know that you have a passion for photography, and you've been in some of those beautiful, just God-made settings ever, jungles, forests, mountains, fields, the ocean, like all of that. Kind of what has experiencing the beauty of God's creation, like how has that broadened your understanding of Jesus?
I think being in so many places, if you said just in that category of things and places and scenery, if you will, creation, it's underscored for me how incredibly compassionate I think God is. And the experience I had on this trek a couple weeks ago, the very first day, everyone's like, the first day is the hardest. I'm like, I got this, I'm fine. First day was the hardest. So you go up about 5,000 feet in elevation and had about a 40-pound pack, which isn't life-ending, but it's pretty close. And so I'm getting up the top of the mountain, and I think I'm at the top, right? You're kind of like, I'm almost there, and you look at the map, you're like, oh my Lanta, I'm nowhere close to the top. But getting to experience in that moment, I think what it reminded me, because I had a lot of time in just total solitude, and I got to the kind of the pass, was the top of the Pyrenees, for those of you familiar with European mountain ranges, which hopefully you should be by now. They teach you that in school, right? Geography. So I'm at the top of the Pyrenees Mountains between France and Spain, in the middle of nowhere. But in that window of time, in that 2-hour window, I didn't see a soul. I didn't see another person. I didn't hear anyone. It was kind of surreal. But experiencing that beauty in that moment of like just getting to look at like these rolling green hills and the fog rolling in and the rain kind of picking up in intensity, actually. It was just amazing to take in his creation and to see that and to go, God loves us enough to create this world around us. It's a constant reminder. If you guys go to the beach and bonfires and see the ocean and the mountains we drive through, if you guys have been to the desert, if you guys have been to a snow-capped mountain, if you guys have been in a thunderstorm, if you've been in, some parts of this world that are so very different, the jungles or places like that, foreign countries, and just things that we've never seen here, you realize how great and how much God cares and how much design there is in this world. And we get to observe, and if we don't pay attention to it, we can miss out on how great God is.
All right, as we head into this final question, band, you can come and take the stage if you need to start setting up. But here's what it says. It says, he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in his faithfulness. So JD, you've just gone on this pretty awesome adventure, the Camino de Santiago. In the last few weeks, is there anything you experienced that just broadened your understanding of the faithfulness of God?
In that time of solitude and hiking and being with people I'd never met, I think seeing God's faithfulness and his provision in a couple ways, and one I shared earlier, in getting there, just getting there is half the journey in life. I feel like showing up is half the battle sometimes. And I made it from the flight from London to the south of France and was going to miss my train to get there. This couple from the airport in Biarritz, France, drives me to they don't know me, I don't know them, we don't know each other. I could either be kidnapped and taken away, but they drive me to the train station, and then I realized that my debit card isn't working, so they not only took me to the train station with like 5 minutes to spare to get on the train I needed to get to, they bought my train ticket. So things like that were happening from like day one. It was crazy to experience. And then the community, again, the people that I kind of met along the way, hearing their stories and that commonality of like we're all here for a reason, and no one does that particular journey by accident, was really cool to see and powerful to see God's faithfulness. Just because you realize that even though we travel over the world, we may not know the language, people aren't that different from us. They have different stories, different parts of the world. They've grown up in different languages, different foods, and things like that. But they have the same desire. They're wired to love God. They just don't necessarily know about Jesus. And so that was really cool to experience God's faithfulness, because I got paired with people who didn't know the Lord, and I saw it as an opportunity to kind of witness to them in that moment. So I could have been with anybody on that trail. There was 50,000 people a year too, and I got 6 people who didn't know Jesus. So that was pretty sweet.
JD, thank you so much. Would you do us the honor and just pray for everyone in the room?
God, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the opportunity to share about missions, Lord, and the opportunity to serve in short-term missions here, Lord, with high school ministry. Lord, thank you that you allow us to go, not only allow us, but call us to go and to serve. And we pray for the hearts, Lord, tonight who are thinking about Ukraine, Lord, to serve in the gypsy camps, these kids who, so many without parents, siblings, Lord, who love them. The kids in Uganda, God, we think about the children at God Cares School. Lord, their smiling faces, and yet they have so much joy, and yet to be able to be there and encourage them as they grow up, Lord, as we are able to teach them in the ways of truth, Lord, and through your scripture. Lord, we learn so much. We come back changed, God, by them because of them, Lord. And so we pray for that now too, and for Dominican Republic, God. I just pray the opportunity again as summer arises next year already, as we're planning that your plans would be clear, Lord, that you draw each and every heart in this room who needs to be on one of those trips, God, if a student's thinking about it, Lord, I pray that you just kind of encourage them. Lord, I pray you prompt them to start filling out the application, not for the sake of just filling it out, Lord, but to say yes to what you're doing here and around the world, God. That we get to be a part of your story, we get to be a part of history in this life and into eternity, that we'd see faces we meet in this life in heaven because we said yes to you. God, help us to grow. Help us to stretch ourselves and to say yes at any cost, Lord. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen.